Greetings, to God be the glory for the wonderful things that God has done. This is your boy, Dr. J.C. Howard here, repping Hope Nation. We're so grateful for the House of Hope Macon Church and all that we do there, and the extension thereof being Hope Nation. And we're here on this day to first of all celebrate the name of Jesus, and we are just so grateful for all that the Lord has done for us in our lives. But more specifically, we need to be reminded that the church should be an operation that goes beyond the four walls, meaning that we should always be a organization and a extension of God's kingdom that is serious about the people of God in which we serve, many of whom are dealing with or have associations that deal with legal matters and the such, judicial matters. And so therefore, we thought it was only fitting in this era in which we are hypersensitive to social justice. We thought that it was only fitting for us to have a round two thereof of our Law and Justice Symposium. And I'm just so grateful for our resident social justice ambassador, that is. She is a phenomenal lawyer in her own right. And I'm just so grateful for Sister Kim Easterling, who is a member of our ministry. And she is an extension of Hope Nation. And the Lord is doing so many wonderful and exciting things in her life, and I am super excited for her. But we want to give you a window, and we want to open a door for you to be exposed to information that is absolutely vital, not just for Black people specifically, but for all people. But we do want to give a particular kind of precedent to the African American community, being as though we deal with the social justice, or rather, we deal with the judicial system at a very higher percentage than most other races and orientations. And so we want to talk about it from the criminal side. We want to talk about it in adults. We want to talk about even from the juvenile justice side. And so therefore, this conversation tonight is absolutely informational for you and for your family. With that being said, I want to hand everything over to Sister Kim Easterling, who is going to welcome and introduce our guests, and she is going to lead us in this phenomenal conversation around law and justice. Sister Kim, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Howard, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. This is part 2 of House of Hope Macon's Law and Politics Symposium, and we are going to be discussing criminal law tonight. And just to give people a short round, when we came up with the Law and Politics Symposium, it was because we wanted to educate, inform, and equip the body of Christ through knowledge about the laws that affect our community, in particular the Black community. And we saw this as a way of passing along information so that people in our church community could then have family and friends. And so essentially it would just seep through other communities, and we would just be a more educated community. And so that's our hope with the symposium, and especially part 2, because we are aware that the criminal justice system does have a large amount of African Americans involved in it. And so tonight we're blessed to have 2 phenomenal speakers. In addition to myself, I will tell people this is a brief background about myself. I'm currently an assistant United States attorney in Georgia, and that's just fancy language for I'm a federal prosecutor. I'm an AUSA. If anybody has ever watched Power, I'm an AUSA, just like Angie was on there. And prior to being an AUSA, I was a state prosecutor for 6 years. I've handled juvenile crimes, misdemeanor, felonies, all the way up to murder cases for the past 12 and a half years. And so I do have some experience in the criminal justice system. Here with us tonight is also Nancy Abudu, who is the Deputy Legal Director for the Southern Poverty Law Center Voting Rights Practice Group. And that role, Ms. Abudu leads a team of lawyers, community organizers, and technical experts in protecting and strengthening the voting rights of people of color and other vulnerable populations, Prior to joining the Southern Poverty Law Center, Nancy was the legal director for the ACLU of Florida and a senior staff attorney with the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. Nancy has litigated a variety of civil rights and civil liberty issues in federal and state courts, including legal challenges to state felon disenfranchisement, proof of citizenship, voter ID laws, and has pushed for greater enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, the National Voter Registration Act, Help America Vote Act, and other federal laws. She also has a practice area that has included prison conditions, free speech, reproductive rights, immigrants' rights, LGBT rights, privacy and government surveillance, and education issues. She's also been a staff attorney with the 11th Circuit in Atlanta, an associate with one of the largest law firms in New York. She has served as an international election observer in Albania, is a member of the ABA Standing Committee on election law, and is a senior fellow with the Environmental Leadership Program based out of Washington, D.C. She's published numerous articles and 2 book chapters, including the most recent 4th edition of the ABA's America Vote. And for those who do not know, ABA stands for the American Bar Association, which is the nation's largest association comprised of lawyers. Nancy is very smart. She went to Columbia University for her undergraduate degree and received her law degree from Tulane Law School. She's won many awards for her civil rights work. She's practiced in Florida, Georgia, New York, and the United States Supreme Court, which is our nation's highest Supreme Court. And in addition to that, Nancy was kind enough to present last year for Part 1 voting rights. She is equal parts intellectual as well as just a kind person. And so I know that people are going to get a lot from her. Our other speaker is Judge Schaefer Young, who is currently a juvenile court judge in our Macon Judicial Circuit. She was appointed on February. I'm trying to push you back and give you more time. She was appointed February the 1st of this year. And prior to being appointed to the bench, Judge Young was an assistant district attorney who prosecuted child abuse, child molestation, and rape cases in the Crimes Against Children unit here in Macon, Georgia. During that time, Judge Young secured convictions in over 50 cases against sex offenders. And by doing that, she has protected our community and the most vulnerable populations within our community. She is very much involved with children who are victims of sexual, physical abuse, and juvenile delinquency. And as a result, Judge Young decided to take her gifts and talents to juvenile court, where she was there for 2.5 years before being promoted to the bench. Judge Young has graduated from Agnes Scott College. She received her law degree from Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And in addition to being a prosecutor, she's done civil litigation, she's done defense work. And so when you talk about someone who has the total package, Judge Young brings a lot to the table. And I will tell you that I know her personally. And so for her, she is definitely a woman of integrity. What you see is what you get. She is the same all the time. And so I'm very pleased to announce her to you. And so I want to get right to it, and I will hand the baton off to Nancy Abudu. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Dr. Howard. It's so wonderful to be a part of this series again, because as Kim said, I had the honor, hopefully, of speaking before many of you about the issue of redistricting. But my topic tonight is going to be about the intersection between the criminal justice system and voting, and how so many people who are directly impacted by the criminal justice system are in fact locked out of the political system, which is why many of them find themselves in the situations caught up again in the system, but also the collateral consequences in terms of the impact on their families. Now, for me, I actually started my voting rights career in the area of felon disenfranchisement. And that was really trying to analyze not only the history, but current application of laws that deny people the right to vote simply because they have a criminal conviction. And for sure, we know that in terms of the history of that prohibition, it predates slavery in many instances, the end of slavery. But we know that the proliferation of those laws came about at the end of slavery. And so you couple the enfranchisement of African American citizens and then the proliferation of crimes that were targeted to ensure criminalizing Black people or newly enfranchised citizens. And then you get the theory or the idea that people indeed have voting rights or political rights, but in reality, they have already been undermined through the Constitution, both state and federal, in terms of making sure indeed they are back to being politically disenfranchised, which in many ways, as some of my clients have equated it to being slavery, and that you are working, you are paying taxes, and yet you have no voice in terms of how those resources are directed. And then, of course, again, decisions, policy decisions being made about you for which you cannot provide any influence. And so in terms of initially looking at this issue, we tried to develop a lot of strategies. Number one, that when you think about when this law was first enacted, which is enshrined in our Constitution, that we didn't have the proliferation of laws that we currently have today. And we didn't have as well documented the racial disparities when it comes to how our laws are implemented, whether it be from stops to arrest, prosecution, and ultimately sentencing. And so our arguments initially to the courts were that we have to look at this holistically, and that while some people may believe that if you've committed a crime, you have suffered some kind of civil death, that you have, I guess, broken a social contract, the reality is that the overwhelming majority of people who have criminal convictions have actually satisfied all of the conditions of their sentence. They're home in their community, struggling to be able to really rehabilitate as our society claims to have as a goal. And so again, that takes us back to, if you have a criminal conviction, it's harder for you to pass a background check if you're able to do it. Certain jobs are unavailable to you. Certain housing opportunities are also unavailable to you. So this goes back to the collateral consequences and why we've tried to allow for more people with criminal convictions to have their voting rights restored. Another argument that we've tried is that the process for getting your rights restored is so confusing. Here in Georgia, we have a term called moral turpitude, and yet the Georgia legislature has never really defined what is moral turpitude. And when pressed to provide a definition, they took what we would say the easy way out of saying, well, we're going to consider all felonies to involve moral turpitude, even though our neighboring state, Alabama, uses the same term and yet somehow has been able to narrow its category of crimes so that not every felony results in the loss of your voting rights. So we've used Alabama as an example to say that, in fact, moral turpitude should be a much more narrow list. And then we've also tried to highlight that even though Georgia may seem to allow people to get their voting rights sooner, because you have to also satisfy probation, and then probation sentences are so long, it really is a de facto permanent disenfranchisement. So there have been bills introduced, unfortunately they didn't go anywhere this session, that would finally define that term so that people could know what indeed their rights are. And when election time comes and we see all of the excitement about it, we don't have people who are silently standing on the sidelines who feel, honestly, like a lot of our clients, as if they are being ignored and completely shut out of this political process, which means in some ways that politicians do not have their interests at the forefront and are not caring as much as they should about the interests of that particular community. Another aspect of felon disenfranchisement that we've tried to challenge is the of tying it to the payment of legal financial obligations. As some of you know, when you come out of the criminal justice system, especially if you were already poor or low income, you're going to come out most likely in a worse situation than when you went in. And you're coming to that conclusion in part because you're exiting the system with court fines, fees, other financial obligations, including victim restitution, that we do not argue whether or not they should be paid, but that people oftentimes do not have the money to pay in one fell swoop just so that they're able to vote. And yet this has been the requirement in places like Florida, for example, that passed a law to allow automatic restoration of rights. And then the legislature came behind that and said, well, you can get automatic restoration as long as you pay all of these financial obligations. And we tried to sue and argue that that requirement in and of itself, not whether the obligation should be paid, but whether or not it should be a barrier to voting, is a poll tax, something that the US Constitution and Congress outlawed decades ago, and that Florida and other states have found a way to capture in a more sophisticated, camouflaged way, but that has the exact same result, which is that lower income and poor people are shut out almost completely from, again, the political process, like our clients. And so we've been trying to really help people understand the full ramifications of these laws, but also look to Congress to finally have a solution. And so we're really happy to talk about and promote the hopeful passage of what's known as the For the People Act. It's currently in Congress as H.R. 1. And this is a law that in the area of felon disenfranchisement would allow people to vote in federal elections upon release from prison. Now, even though that's only in federal elections, the hope is that because states don't want to create two systems of election administration, that they would follow the federal law and allow people with criminal convictions to vote upon release from prison in state elections as well. And one of the reasons of many that we're promoting this is because there is a direct tie between civic engagement and people actively participating in their community and lower recidivism rates. If people are seeing that they are being taken seriously and there are real steps or policies being adopted to address their issues, then they automatically, for the most part, are more invested in making sure that those policies work for the community and for themselves and their families for sure. And so what we are trying to do at the Southern Poverty Law Center is have folks like me speak less and those who are directly impacted speak more. So you can hear their stories, their struggles, their challenges, and their ideas in terms of how we can really change the court's opinion as well as public opinion around these issues. And so I just wanted to, again, try to expose the connection between what you're going to hear from Judge Young and Kimberly with respect to the voting rights work I've been doing. But if I may just deviate slightly, because in addition to felon disenfranchisement, we have laws right now that are impacting those who don't even have a criminal conviction. Those of us who have been able to exercise our right to vote without a lot of encumbrances. And now the Georgia legislature has proposed several provisions that for many people will make it almost impossible for them to vote. Some of those provisions include requiring people to include a copy of their photo ID in their absentee ballot application. And we have to be reminded that there are a lot of folks who don't have photocopies, machines, or printers or scanners in their home. that we're still dealing in an era of COVID, even though we're getting closer to a vaccine full distribution. There are many people who are still monitoring or complying with social distancing guidelines, and being able to access this kind of information simply in order to vote is going to create an undue burden. These laws are also attempting to cut back not only the locations where you can drop off a vote by mail ballot, but also the hours and the days when you can do so. And we have concrete statistics showing the number of people who were able to vote outside of those normal business hours, outside of regular business days, and therefore how many people are going to be directly impacted if those hours, days, and locations are cut short. And then the last thing that I'll highlight is the purging of the voter rolls. The state is proposing that they use a national database that has already been proven to contain so many inaccuracies that it results in people being wrongfully removed from the rolls more than it removes people who shouldn't be on the rolls. And yet, despite all of this evidence that these kind of cross checks do not work, Georgia is intent on using that same system that will result in the purging unlawfully of many names. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that purging happens predominantly to African Americans and people of color, and especially people like me who tend to have immigrant sounding names, non-American traditional names. We are the ones who are being targeted by these kinds of purges because they're trying to take people of color off the rolls and people who they deem as immigrants off the rolls as well. And so I guess on a bright note, as I end, because it's not all bad, we are working on a solution, another federal legislative solution. And this time we hope it will be the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We're so happy and honored to have this law named after John Lewis. I mean, Georgia and our unique history, and when it comes to voting rights, makes it only befitting that that law honor him. And also it would address a lot of the issues that I talked about. So all of these negative provisions that Georgia is trying to adopt that would affect all of us, not just those with felony convictions, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act could block a lot of these laws in their tracks because of the evidence of their disparate impact. And so when we hope you will get lots of information about how to contact your legislators so they are informed, not only about the importance of this law, but that you are watching and keeping track and holding them accountable. And we look forward to providing more public education materials as we get closer to local and statewide elections, so that people really understand and exercise their rights. So with that, again, I just thank you all so much for your work, for your attention, and for your commitment, as Dr. Howard said, to really put our faith in action and make sure that we are doing all that we can to make this world and leave this world a better place. Thank you.
Nancy, thank you so much for that information. In addition to contacting our legislators, what are other things that we can do as a community in order to, be the change we want to see, in order to contact our representatives to get the ball rolling?
Well, I would say number one, especially as a faith community, one of the provisions under attack is what they've called souls to the polls. The fact that so many congregants use that Sunday gathering to then provide rides to the polls and really make it a community event. The bills that I talked to you about would eliminate Sunday voting. And I think that as a member of a religious community, it's really important to lift up or elevate those voices, because a lot of this is supposed to be under the guise of integrity and fairness. But how unfair it would be to deny a faith community one of the most easily accessible opportunities to build community, to make sure people exercise their right to vote, and to do it in a fast efficient way. So that's the number one thing I would say for your members in terms of elevating your voice, is really looking and talking about this issue from the lens of faith.
I wanted to just jump in also with a question, Nancy, and I'm glad that you brought up Souls to the Polls, because it's a direct assault. It's an outright assault on our voter mobility, being as though we understand that, particularly in the Black and Brown communities, the ways in which and the schedules in which these individuals work. Abstaining even from talking about the ways in which COVID has impacted the entire dynamic of the way that families are operating. And so even if you just look at it from a general sense, in terms of working schedules and scheduling and timeframes, Black and Brown communities vote high later in the evening or on the weekends, and particularly in the Black community on Sundays, because Souls to the Polls is such a big event, and it's a big turnout. And I remember, I'm a product of Souls to the Polls. I remember attending so many of these different events, and so it's so critical. I want to know, and Kim talked about the ways in which we can try to. She asked about the ways in which we can, get in conversation with our legislators and with our representatives. I want to know, you were talking about the purging of the rolls, which I think it doesn't get enough attention, and I really don't. This purging of the rolls, it sounds extremely criminal. And my question is, why can't we get the spotlight on that? The ways in which the GOP is able to just arouse such kind of propaganda around voting speculation and everything that happened, even here in Georgia. Georgia turned blue in a significant way. We saw something in Georgia that some people probably didn't think they would ever see, just a blue sweep in Georgia. And so how do we amplify, right? How can we amplify the ways in which we talk about voter disenfranchisement from our local community, from where we are?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And thank you for raising an issue that some would say is debatable in terms of whether Georgia really is blue. Because the only reason why these provisions are even getting any traction is because Georgia is not blue at the legislature.
Wow.
We are the power dynamic is completely concentrated and getting more entrenched, which is what, when Kim invited me last time to talk about redistricting, how that entrenchment happens. In terms of, I guess, the messaging, that is what our community, I don't think that we have completely mastered, because voter fraud is a term that and I know, nonpartisan, so this is not targeting it. This is just the reality of who is leading this misinformation and disinformation. They've been able to use the term voter fraud to discuss a situation that is not happening.
Right.
But while they're doing that, they are committing voter fraud. And so how is it that we have not maybe co-opted the term in a stronger way, in a consistent, unified way, to talk about what they're doing is voter fraud? If these bills pass, they are creating the fraud. They are creating the misrepresentation and illusion that our election process is under siege, when they are the ones taking it under siege so that they can concentrate power. So that is a long, Dr. Howard, roundabout way of saying that we need to really start taking control of the language. We have to be the messengers rather than relying on them to create the narrative. And we need more impacted people to be visible. I can only do so, say so much, be all of us. We need more soldiers in this particular battle. And so I hope in part those who are hearing this panel today will become the trainers, and that we're doing a teach the trainers because we need a lot more people to deliver this message.
Thank you. That's all I had, Kim. You can. I'm not going. I'm gonna leave because we go on for a while with this thing right here. Y'all already know we could go on. Well, okay. Well, let me just one matter of fact. I'm just gonna let me insert this little commercial, Kim. This little commercial. Where for the returning citizens, for our returning citizens, where can they find, particularly in Georgia, because, and let me just go ahead and put just a little millennial context on this real quick, because there's a rapper by the name of Boosie. He's very popular amongst young people. His name is Boosie, and he's out of New Orleans, but he recently became a citizen of Georgia some years ago. And for the first time in his life, including Shaquille O'Neal, for the first time in his life, he voted in this past election, and a few months before he even voted, he didn't even know he didn't even know he could vote. He didn't even know he had the ability to vote. And because of the result of an interview that he had that went viral on YouTube, somebody reached out to him and said, "Hey man, listen, I know you've been to jail, boom, 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 but you can vote. We can get you, we can find out." And he was able to participate in this past election. And so where can returning citizens find the information? Where can they find the information? Because a lot of them say, "I don't think I can vote. I've been to jail." That just because you've been locked up or before, just because you made a mistake, does not mean that you cannot vote and that you've been totally restricted. So where can we find the information?
Sure. Well, one, I will commit to getting Kim a list of resources so that you have something a little more exhaustive. But just to get started, Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLcenter.org is a place on our voting rights page where you can get good information. But we partner and try to promote our partner organizations. The Georgia Justice Project has been doing amazing work when it comes to expungement and helping people get back on the rolls. The Southern Center for Human Rights is another organization that's been doing some really good work in the community, educating people about their rights. So those are 3 places to start. But again, Kim, I'll be sure to provide more resources.
Thank you.
And thank you, Nancy, for that, because I don't think that people really understand the impact of having a voice in our democracy. I think a lot of times the community at large looks at people like you and say, "Oh, well, she'll do it." And the people at the Southern Poverty Law Center will do it. And, they have the expertise, and I don't know, so I'll just defer to them when we all have power individually to contact people, to watch information, meetings like this, and to share with other people to really get engaged. And so thank you so much for letting us know about the pending House bills in the State House and Senate, as well as what's going on in Congress, and just overall how you guys are doing great work. So thank you so much for giving us your time and of your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yes, anytime. And we'll probably, with Pastor's permission, we'll probably have you back again, because it's just that good.